Okay, so in your book, you say you've dedicated the last 10 years of your life to study the myth of meritocracy. Why do you consider it a myth? Isn't the American and Western culture all founded on meritocracy? In Italy, for the first time in history, the Ministry of Education is now called Ministry of Education and Merit. Please tell us about your studies on this topic of meritocracy and what you've found out.
Yes. Sometimes countries that are founded on merit are especially those countries where merit is a hidden factor. I think the more a country sometimes talks about how things are merit based, the more the countries are trying to create a system where people will believe that is merit based. And so I think when we see these types of things, it's really important to understand that the word merit has lots of different definitions. I think the ministry changing the name, the Ministry of Education, to Ministry of Education and Merit, can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what our definition of merit is. So it's important to remember that merit is more than just hard work. Merit is more than just effort. Merit is based on lots of different perceptions, and the more we're able to understand those perceptions and understand our own strengths and values and the way we enrich, the more we're able to make it a positive thing for ourselves and our careers and in our lives.
Thank you. Next question is, in your book, you propose many tools and also strategies to overcome prejudice that other people may have about us. Can you please tell us, according to you, in your opinion, what are the three most important things a person should know not to be victim of prejudice?
Yeah, prejudice and stereotypes do exist. They're everywhere. So I think it's important to understand that we can flip those in our favor, that we don't have to be bystanders and allow this to happen. So the key is to understand our own strengths and weaknesses and underestimated strengths. Number two, understand those underlying perceptions that others have, so we know whether it is the same and overlapping with our understanding of it, or if it's drastically different. And number three is having those tactics so that we can flip them in our favor, so that we can take those underlying perceptions and flip them to what they actually are.
Great, thank you. So you say that the prejudice of others and those that we have towards ourselves, that is the awareness of our limits, they are a weapon we can use to become successful. Could you please explain this concept better? It sounds like a paradox in a way.
Yeah. The reason it's a weapon is because it really stops the conversation and it pauses things for a split second. So imagine that you're in a ballroom or you're dancing and all of a sudden the music stops just for 5 seconds and comes back on again. Even though the music has seemingly continued, there's a split second where everyone pauses and stops, and it brings people to a different place, or it brings people to a different thought. And that's exactly what happens when you flip these perceptions, that it can be somebody you've known for 10 seconds or someone you've known for 10 years, that they consider you in a slightly different way, and that starts a different conversation. They ask a different question, they engage with you differently. And that's really the value of something like this.
Thank you. I'm very interested in two counterintuitive pieces of advice you give. First, never arrive too prepared at a job interview. Second, never trust too much linear thinking. Better leaving room to your gut and to your intuition. Why are these two attitudes so important?
Yeah, these two attitudes that seem counterintuitive are so critical. The first one is don't be too prepared. And the reason why this is important is because we often, if we're trying to change somebody's mind, or we're trying to talk with somebody. We have all of these lists of things that we want to say. There's maybe 5 or 6 or 7 things that we want to say, but it doesn't allow us to be dynamic. It doesn't allow us to shift with the conversation. Instead, if we only have maybe 2 or 3 vague things that we want to make sure that we get our point across for, it allows us to engage in the conversation, but come back to those 2 or 3 things in a very tangential way that's still very natural. It doesn't make us stick to a script that doesn't allow for progress. The second piece is around this overly linear path. When we're overly linear, it's like we're trying to we're embarking on this path from A to B, but it doesn't take into account that there's other things around this path. And so what I say is go for directionality, go in a certain direction, but allow that your path and your journey will take different steps along the way, allowing for your gut feel. So I'm actually working on my second book, which is around gut feel and intuition, which speaks to how do we hone and harness and build our gut feel in a way that allows us to use our experience and our culture and our backgrounds to make those very difficult, uncertain decisions. And that's exactly what we're able to do when we don't take this completely linear path.
Thank you.
Sure.
So last question. Do you happen to know the book The Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias by Pamela Fuller, published by Salmon & Schuster in 2020? If yes, could you please compare it to your book and find similarities and differences?
Sure. I think, unconscious bias is something that's very implicit. It's not something that is out there that is explicit. So there's certainly an element to that where we need to manage and be guiding people to things that they may not be aware of. But I think what sets Edge apart is that it accounts for the fact that some things are explicit, that they're very conscious. Some things are implicit and they're unconscious. But there are also things that are in the middle. There's a continuum. So for example, you may say something like, oh, I know it's because I'm a woman that you think X, Y, and Z. Well, and then their response may be, oh, no, that's not what I'm thinking, even if that's exactly what they're thinking. There are times when they may be explaining it in an explicit way, but it's very implicit, where they may be explaining it in an implicit way, but it's very explicit, and everything in between. And so what Edge allows you to do is, in a very benign and safe way, be able to guide those perceptions. So you never have to say things like, I know it's because I'm a woman that you feel X, Y, and Z. You never even need to mention your gender or race, ethnicity, culture, education, class, religion, anything like that. You don't have to mention those things because there are ways that you can show how you enrich and delight and guide that go beyond any of those typical cast of characters, that go beyond the unconscious, that go beyond the conscious itself, so that you can gain an edge.